Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Karan, for introduction. So my name is Mohith Shrivastava. I've been in Salesforce ecosystem for almost a decade now, 10 years. I've been working as a developer, as an architect before. Now I work as a Salesforce developer evangelist, as a part of marketing team and our developer relations team. So excited here to present something and connect with you all. So let me actually share my screen, and Karan, let me know if you can see my screen.
Uh, yes.
Okay, thank you so much for the confirmation. So today we will talk about LWC debugging techniques and testing it. So I want to change the format now. Before I begin, there's a forward-looking statement here. So do not make your purchasing decisions based on any forward-looking statements that I might make. Always make your decisions based on current offerings of the product. And I would like to change a format here. Instead of having slides and talking about today, I will take this session and we will live code. In fact, I did not prepare anything, and for the session, so it'll be like live coding. So we'll build something, we'll build a Lightning web component, and we'll see how we can debug, how we can test using just testing framework. And then I will sort of leave you with some reference resources and materials. Okay. So with that, let's actually get started. So the reason why I sort of wanted to do live coding was because a lot of times as a developers, right? We learn by doing it, and like working through the slides might motivate you, but really you won't get the knowledge unless you like sort of go hands on and code and things like that, right? So that's why what I want to do is like code, and that also gives me an opportunity to show different tools that we have. How I do things in my day-to-day coding, right? And that way it also helps us to understand a beginner's mind, like because I have not done any prep for this session, right? So I want to just live do, and then it also exposes what I'm thinking as a developer, right? So what I've done is I've sort of have some reference materials that I'm going to use for this coding sessions. Will be LWC recipes app for me as a reference. And then I have a trailhead module, which has Lightning web components test, so that I can reference it back. And then I have the standard documentation opened. And then I have the actual jest guide, the jest document, because we're going to write some jest test, right? So I have all these reference materials. So let's see. So let's try to sort of build a component. Now, the first thing I wanted to mention is about our tools, right? So I always use Salesforce VS Code. I use VS Code from Microsoft as my IDE. And then I use this Salesforce extension pack. So Salesforce extension pack sort of has all the language features. Like, for example, we can compile code. It has syntax highlighting, auto completion. So all those features. So you can get the Salesforce extension pack by searching for Salesforce extension pack. It's a very popular extension pack, and you can install it in your local machine. Now, also you have to have Salesforce CLI installed for a lot of this extension pack has a dependency on Salesforce CLI. So you'll need to make sure that you have this Salesforce CLI called SFDX version. If you Google, you will see the SFDX CLI installation link for depending on your operating system. Now, I wanted to put some forward-looking things here. So soon, the platform engineering team at Salesforce will be launching Code Builder. So the experience or the UI of the Code Builder will be very similar to the VS Code interface that we see here. So that way, if you start using today on the desktop, when we sort of launch Code Builder and sort of go live with Code Builder on the on the browser. So the entire idea of Code Builder is you don't have to install all these tools. You don't have to sort of overload your laptop with all these tools. It'll be available to you on fly, using Code Builder, right? But today we're not going to use Code Builder, right? But we're going to use the Salesforce extension pack. So that's a little forward looking about Code Builder. So the next thing I want to do is, so I have all these tools, right? And if you want to ever scaffold a Salesforce project, right? If you're starting a new project, the extension packs makes it so easier. So I can say create project, and then it'll ask me to pick template. I say standard. I say project name. Let's say LWC testing is my project name, right? And then it'll ask me for, okay, which folder you want this project to be. For now, I'm just going to put it on the project folder, and then I create the project. Now, this is a standard process. If you're trying to create a new Salesforce project and sort of work, if you have your existing project in a format that is not like this, you can actually convert that to Salesforce DX format. So converting into Salesforce DX format will give you some really good decomposition, especially when you see the metadata around objects or static resources, right? It won't be like one massive XML file that you have to deal with. It'll be decomposed into multiple folders. So that's one of the benefits of sort of using this kind of a structure. I don't have to worry about converting it because it's a very new project for me. It's a new project. That's why I did not sort of worry about it. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is actually create a scratch arc. So I've already sort of authorized this with DevHub, but if you have not authorized, you can and the DevHub is sort of available to you in your production environment. So you turn it on, and then you need the permissions, right? Permissions. Once the DevHub is enabled, so that you can use that DevHub to create scratch arcs or clone sandboxes or create sandboxes from the CLI, and the VS Code utility sort of adds some of the commands, not all that the CLI provides, but some handy utility. So I've already have a DevHub org with me. I've sort of I can actually see them by just running a command like sfdx force config list. So this will tell me if I've authorized. So as you can see, I have a DevHub org sort of authorized. I'm calling it as default DevHub, and that org, and I can open that org actually, but I don't want to get into details because this session is more about testing and showing you debugging power and capabilities, right? So I'll leave that as a little bit of exercise for you guys to figure it out if you still do not know how to enable DevHub, etc. So because I have DevHub enabled and connected, I can now create a scratch arc so that we can work. Okay, so we'll create a scratch arc. And let's say testing. Let's say after 7 days, I want this arc to sort of destroy itself. So that's the power of scratch arc. Is like you create, you destroy. So a lot of use cases it will fit in. If you are like working in agile and sort of you work in sprints, and then you're okay with not having a lot of metadata, right? Which requires a lot of configuration. So if you have all of your metadata already in your source control, you can adopt this kind of a model. Now, if you do not sort of have, let me switch off my Twitter feeds because that is going to distract me a lot. So let's switch it off. Okay. All right. So so what I was telling is, if you do not if you have a lot of metadata in the org, right? Then there are different strategies to retrieve metadata. One of the handy tool is to use something called as org browser. So if you are attached to regular metadata, you should see something like an org browser here, where you can click in and select the components that you want to work with. Now, if you want to download everything at a shot, one way to do that is actually put everything inside an unmanaged package and then run a command and put the package name. It will retrieve everything. So that's another way to retrieve all the metadata from your org. But for this project, right, I'm just starting new. So I'm just going to go ahead and sort of create a component. So let's create a component. So let's create a simple hello world component to begin with, right? And so that I can show you different techniques. So I'm going to truly call it as hello world, which is not exciting. Let's create something which is really good. Let's say a tree component. okay, let's say a tree view, something like that. So let's create, it's gonna ask me the default folder, right? So yeah, so we have this, right? Now, so if you haven't sort of worked with Lightning Web Components, right? This is how the structure of Lightning Web Components is. Now, if you're coming from Aura, development, you will notice one thing, that this is so much simplified than Aura Components, because in Aura Components, we used to have more bunch of files, while in Lightning Web Components, you only have to worry about 3 different files. That is, your component file, that is the HTML file, your JavaScript file, and then your metadata file. Now, you can also keep adding more HTML files and more JavaScript files. It totally allows you to do that within a bundle. Or you can only have a JavaScript-based, module, which we call it as, let's say you want to create your own module. You can do that by just creating, a JS file within a bundle without HTML or metadata file. And so the good thing about the Lightning Web Components is, they are sort of designed based on the latest and greatest ES6 features. Now, what is it? So start now, or okay, I'm just gonna say I'm gonna delay by a day and don't want to mess it up. Okay, all right. So sorry about that disturbance, but let's continue. So yeah, so what I was telling is, if you are like sort of working on Lightning Web Component, right? One of the things is it follows the latest ES6 standards. And one of the features of JavaScript ES6 is ability to sort of break your components into multiple sort of subcomponents, and also break your JavaScript files into multiple modules, right? So as you can see, Salesforce is sort of providing us a module called LWC, which has a function. So this is not a function. Let's call it as class. So the thing about ES6 is it's object oriented. That means you have classes, you have methods, similar to how you sort of work with your object oriented programming languages like Apex, or Java, right? So it follows pretty much that. But the good thing is it doesn't also stop you from like writing functions, so you can also write everything as functions. But here, like, we import something, right? So let's create a tree view component. So one of the easiest way to sort of get started with Lightning Web Components is obviously sort of following the documentation that we have, and also the component reference guide. The component reference guide is like really handy, because a lot of the components that you might want to use for your application, there are tons of components that Salesforce sort of automatically gives you, which adheres to the CSS provided by SLDS, or the design pattern provided by SLDS, and also has a lot of the functionality. So that way, let's say I want to create something new, right? It's I can go here, look at it, and create it. I don't have to like sort of spend a lot of time building everything from the scratch. Like, a lot of the work has been already done for you. And that's the power of Salesforce platform as well. So anyway, so I want to build a tree component. So I'm going to select this tree view component. So there's a little nice component, tree view component, right? And I want to build that component here, right? So yeah, so building that is pretty much easier, actually. It's not going to be that difficult. We're just going to copy paste a lot of code from here and just going to work with that. So let's copy. I think we called this as tree. Okay, so this is how you sort of, so this essentially is a tree data, we are just mocking the data at this point, not coming from the server, but imagine this can also be coming from an Apex class. So it has like, labels, and then items, which are tree. And then further, if you need like, nested tree, you can still go inside the items. You can go one more level into items. You can have one more item, right? So it's just a tree view, essentially. And they provide you a markup for that. So the markup is lightning tree, right? So we can, again, we can put here, we can call it as roles itself, right? And yeah, so once I have this, right, so now one of the features that I want to show you is local development. So for local development, you need to have a plugin called so when I do my SFTX plugins, right, I also have a plugin called LWC dev server. Do you see that? So for local development, right, what you can do is you can install this plugin. So you say SFTX plugins install, and then put the name of the plugin, and then say enter, and that will give you a plugin for the local development. So now I can, like I can push this source to my org and sort of view it, right? But let's say you're iterating on a project, and you want to quickly sort of build some design from mockups, right? You can just keep coding here and seeing in the local development server. So let's see this locally. So you have a command here called preview component locally, right? So it appears here, and you just start. And this is going to ask, okay, for desktop browser. You can also use for mobile, but there's you need some simulators, and we have documentation on our site to show you some of them. So as you can see, like quickly, we can see that this component is functional, it's working, right? It's all great. Yeah, so this is all cool and working, right? So without sort of pushing onto the server, I'm still able to sort of create a component and preview it, right? Now let's talk about debugging this, right? So let's add some more functionality. Let's add some kind of a click event where we dispatch data. This was pretty easy, just sort of working through it. So let me bring up. Okay, so where was the docs where I was copying it from? Okay, here we go. So okay, so now what I want is, let's add some functionality, right? So if you go to documentation, is there a way I can capture the click event? Okay, so this is the click event. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to capture a click event, right? So they show you some examples around how to like add elements, right? So let's try to work through one of them so that we can, let's try to do a handle click event, right? So handle click event, okay, so they have a button, they have a simple button which sort of handles the event. So let's just copy paste that. Just copy paste. Okay, so this is like a simple on click event, right? Now let's see. So let's add that function. So adding a function is pretty simple. You handle click the event. Okay. Now what I want to do is sort of console log this event and see the values, right? So again, I'm going into debugging concepts now. So one of the things you can do here is just console log and sort of see the output is by just using a simple console log, right? And where was my local development? Let's just refresh it. So I have the button, as you can see. Now console. So as you can see, it sort of console log the event here. Okay, so on local development, right? So one of the things I want to clearly highlight is you cannot set breakpoints today in local development. Like if you try to set a breakpoint and try to pause your debugger of the VS Code, you cannot today. And that's because we do not generate the source map set to allow you to completely sort of debug it locally, right? So when you are doing local development, right, one of the things to note is if you want to debug something, just use console log statements, and that should sort of get you going. In fact, if you try to like visualize your source, it's not in the format that you can sort of debug it. Okay, so that's and there are hacks people have done in the community, some hacks to sort of do some debugging, etc. But the reality is, we are still not there yet from the engineering team to provide you something really cool, like a source map that we can generate, which sort of scaffolds this into component bundles, right? So that's why if you're like sort of just building here, like use it for design purposes. When you are using the local development, so just use it for like design purposes and stuff like that. That's the thing with the local development. Now, if you really want to debug, right, line by line, and that's where we actually get into pushing this to the server. So let's see how we can sort of push this to the server and debug these components there. Now, one more thing I want to mention about local development is there are so many other modules that are yet to be supported in the local development. For example, navigation modules, or Lightning message service, or for example, let's say the locker services. So all these things are still not supported on the local development, and it's on the roadmap for the teams to support. So that's why the local development service is pretty limited, but it's still powerful, because if you want to really do your design, it's still powerful, right? So let's see how we can debug these components on the server. So for that, I'll have to push to the server. But before that, I'm going to expose these components, right? Also, I have to define the targets for this, like where exactly I want these components to sort of appear, right? So I need to do that. So whether it is on the app page, whether I want these components to be on the record page, I have to define that config, right? So to do that, let's actually go and see target config here. Target config. Misspell on, configuration file text. Yeah. So here we show, different configuration files and how it works in the app builder, right? So let's configure one for app builder. So I'm gonna just add one of these targets. So I'm just gonna add a target for maybe an app page. That's about it at this point. Or let's keep it on the home page itself. Okay. So yeah, I made those changes. Now I want to sort of push this to the org. So let's push this code to the org. Push source. This is how you push your source to the org. Okay, so now we have things pushed onto the org. So let's open the org and sort of see. Let's open the org and see the component on the org. Yeah. So now let's just put it on the home page. So I'm gonna just go to the home page here. Edit. Let's add the tree component. As you can see, we can see this component. Just gonna drop in here. Okay, so one of the things that happened here was, let's assign this as an org default, and let's just save. Okay, so now one of the things that happened here was, I don't like the background, right? I really don't like the background here, because it's it has to be a really white background. So let's fix that before we actually see debugging on the server, right? So let's actually fix it. So one way to fix that is just by using something called Lightning card. Let's use the Lightning card component. Component allows you to sort of put everything inside one nice card. Notice, I'm not happy with the format here of my code. So I'll talk about prettier now. But let's see if we can get this stuff. to sort of chop neatly. So this should change now. Okay, it looks much better, right? I would also want this to go in the center. One way to do that would be just get rid of it from here and instead just put it as a title. Okay. Now, before I kind of go further, right? So one of the things we want to do is, auto prettify it or format this because, as a developer, I want the code to be clean, right? And hand formatting is something that, definitely something that can take some work, right? So that's why we have prettier in our package.json. There are other modules that I'll talk about when we actually get into Jest, writing test and writing Jest. But let's talk about a prettier, right? So prettier. So to get prettier, right? So all you need to do is have these dev dependencies sort of configured, and sort of have a package.json in your project folder, and then we basically do an npm install so that we can get all those dependencies, right? So it's going to take a minute, not even a minute, maybe another 10 seconds. It's bringing all the node modules. There you go. There it is. Okay, perfect. So now we have all the node modules, right? So now we should be able to really use our prettier plugin. So we should have an option which says format this with prettier, right? So it did prettify our code, right? Similarly, you can prettify your JavaScript as well. So you go here, say format document with prettier. Okay, so it did format for me. Now you can also configure certain behaviors, like for example, in the prettier.erc, right? We would, let's say you want a tab width of like 4, like I didn't sort of 2, right? So we have prettier configurations in our LWC recipes app, that as a standard for all of the applications actually, because just to be consistent, right? So let's actually go for what's that? So prettier.erc file, and just copy that. So you see here, we want to say single quote and we want to say tab width of 4. I think those are the things that we add. Rest of the things is taken care, I guess. Is there anything else that we add? No, and then we have the common overrides. I think, okay, so that's all we need. Yeah, so you can make the prettier changes and then pretty much fix the JS file to say, there you go. It just formats a little bit better with 4 tab spaces. Okay, so let's push this code, right? And yeah, so coming back to our objective of understanding debugging, right? So one of the techniques I showed you was simply console.log. That's not really a good technique, honestly, because you might end up adding a lot of console.logs everywhere, right? So one of the techniques that we can follow is by actually going on to inspect element and seeing the sources. So one of the things you will see by default, we just put everything as a minified file, right? As you can see, everything is minified. Now what I can do is I can select and say prettify this, right? But still our code, a lot of the code you cannot figure out, especially the variable, it's all different, right? So it's hard to sort of debug it in this minified format. So that's why what we recommend is, turn on the Lightning debug in your scratch-out. So once you turn that on, or in your sandboxes, this file will look really better, and you don't have to do a lot of debugging, or a lot of these elements will be proxied. So even if you try to print something, you'll have to say json.stringify everywhere. So so let's just turn on that Lightning Debugger. So to turn it on, you just go to the user. Go to the user, and then you essentially select the user. Oh, I picked the wrong user here. Let's select the system admin user. And then what we do here is we turn on, not about it. So yeah, so basically go to the Lightning Components debug mode and just go to user and say enable. Okay, so once I do that, right, you will see the difference. So if I inspect this in Chrome or Firefox, I should now see a file which is so much better actually. Is it better? No. Okay, so let's hard reload. So sometimes what happens is this actually caches everything. So we can hard reload so that, you know, we can get the debug flag going on. And okay, so now if we go inspect, and let's actually go to the sources tab, right? And then we go to the component. We have a better looking component here. We do, right? So now it's a lot more better. At least I can see my handle click function, right? I can see my data. I can also see my variables are no more like, you know, A, B, or C. It's got better. It's got really better. You know, it feels like the same code that I have, right? So next you can use you know, a couple of techniques. One of the techniques is obviously you know, use something called pause execution. You can use the keyword called debugger, right? And the thing will pause there, or you can actually go and set it up. You know, you can set a breakpoint in your code. So let's set a breakpoint in our code. So we can come here and say sources, and then come back here. So all your components will be inside this modules /C, and then you will see your component tree sort of being loaded here. So, okay, so now, you know, just set the breakpoints, right? So once you kind of set the breakpoints, you know, your execution will actually stop here. So for example, when I click here, you can see my execution actually stopped here, right? And the things to pay attention to here is, okay, so I stopped here, right? So now I can hover over it, and it will give me the data sets, right? Like the things that I have. So if I'm sending some kind of a data here, like I have a custom event or something I'm firing, I can actually go and look at the console. I mean, without the console, I can go and look at this event, right? And that's the power. Like now you can step through each line of the code. So that's, yeah. So that's the thing. And also, you know, sometimes what happens is it actually gets into Aura files. Like as you can see, Aura prod debug, that's the files from Salesforce. So it gets into that thing, right? And that's where, you know, if you can do a little bit of black boxing in your browser, that is, you know, you can go and sort of say that you want to exclude this Aura prod debug.js files completely whenever a debugger pauses, you know, so that you are only viewing your files, right? So let's see, let's try to do that actually. There's a little bit of settings. There are a couple of settings actually that that really help you. One of the settings that I always enable is called custom formatter. So you can find that setting somewhere here. Is there a way they allow us to sort of search the custom formatter? Let's see. So you see black boxing, this is what I was talking about. By black boxing, you can add, you know, you can add your own patterns here to black box. Like all the hedgebase/.js files are there. Similarly, you can add a pattern for like the Aura component we had was the, let's see, I think it was was the file name. Let's go to network, our sources. And so for example, if you want to like black box this aura/prod debug.js, you can actually do that by going back to that settings, going back to the black boxing and saying aura prod debug.js. So if you black box, then this, so debugger will skip through this script and will not stop executions thrown by them, So that's the power of black boxing. Now you can also add patterns, right? Any file of this nature will go here. Also, I was talking about the custom mapper enablement, and there should be a way to. So what the custom mapper will do is, let's say you have an add API variable in your Lightning Web Components, and you pass to the front end. This is the one that I was talking about, enable custom formatters. So with the custom formatter, what happens is if you have an add API enabled thing, like for example, let's say I have add API variable, right? Let's call it as label. Let's say I call it as label, right? So, and then if I pass this label to my front end, let's say I pass it here, right? The label here to the front end. I want to give this a value. So let's give this as a value as roles. So without custom formatter, right? When you try to debug this, right, on the HTML, this will not show up on your markups when you try to visualize the markups. But if you enable like custom formatters, you can actually view the data in the browser. So that's the overall benefit of custom formatters. So let's push this code. Yeah, so always enable these two things. One is custom formatters, and the other technique that I showed you is black box. Black box anything that you think is not something that you should be worried about, right? So those are the two things to actually remember. Yeah. Okay, so you see this warning, it says black box in the debugger, right? So, okay, so I did push the change. So let's see. So now that I have the custom formatters, let's see. Okay, so let's see. So it did actually print the roles. As you can see, we use the bindings, right? If I actually look at the, oh, sorry, did go up something. I messed up the stuff here. Just give me a sec here. Okay, let's do this. Let's just change it to the regular size.
Uncheck that.
Yeah. Sorry, my camera is in front, right? So that's why I can't see that small box here.
Yeah.
That's the fun stuff. Okay, so now if we go to the sources, right, and if I look at, okay, so let's say I want to view the sources here, right? So one things I can do is, as I said, it will be, all the API properties will be visible on the front end, right? So let's see. Okay, I want to get my camera out of my way. Let's see if okay, this is much better. If I minimize, it's much better for me because I can see. Okay, so now, right, so I can select the element. So as you can see now, this is actually, I can view this, right? And try this exercise where, you can, if you do not turn that custom formatter, you will see that this will not be sort of visible to you. That's the power of custom formatter. So enable that and then enable the black boxing. Also in the black boxing right now, it will be much more easier. So for example, if I with the black boxing, right, it will not actually get into things. So it'll be much smoother experience. Yeah. Is it going into the aura file? See, it's no more going into the aura prod file. Let's do this. See, it skipped it, right? So you can find all the files that you want to black box and just black box it, so that, you know, if you want to really focus on one specific component, right, that can be taken care of. Okay, so before I shift towards showing the jest and how to work with jest, is there any questions there, Karan, on the page there, on the chat window?
I think specific to the debugging, I think that is a question around availability for the code builder.
Okay, yeah, so code builder. So we have this innovation series sort of starting up in October. So I think November is the time frame. Again, Safe Harbor is the time frame where you will see some traction around code builder and its availability. May not be like GA, but, you know, definitely something more than pilot, you know. So some sneak peeks and things like that. Okay. All right, so let's move on to jest testing, which is more exciting than debugging. So yeah, so debugging, this is the thing, you know, like you can't do it on the local development. You know, best way to do it is on the server and just add breakpoints here and there, and use the custom formatter, enable the custom formatter, and also black box all the scripts that you think are no more relevant to your component, you know, if you want to really get deep into the debugging. And yeah, and, you know, just understand Chrome dev tools in general, because that's what is going to help you debug. And one of the things with the Chrome dev tools is also gives you a call stack, so you can see like which functions got called and all the call stack that happened, you know, during that particular invocation, on the function invocation, so that you can trace down the hierarchy tree and see all the functions. So that's another aspect of it that you can use. Okay, now let's get back to writing some jest test. Okay, so again, jest testing, right? A lot of work that you can find. Like we have lots of components on LWC recipes app, and also LWC recipes app has lots of test cases. So all sorts of test cases. Now I'm going to cover some things, like I'm going to cover some of the features of the jest. For example, you know, like how to test your wire adapter, or how to like write code for you know, event testing and things like that. But if you want to like really understand how to write a mock service for you know, something that platform doesn't give, then you can always come back to our LWC's recipes app, and you'll see that any folder that you open and go to the test file, we have written a test file for that, you know, and it has all the comprehensive you know, just testing. But I'm going to show some things and we'll see how to work with it. Okay. All right. So writing jest, right? So first thing first is, again, having the right modules. So if we go to SFDX project, so if you go to package.json, right, you need the dev dependencies for jest. And one of the projects that we have, which is open source again, is at Salesforce /SFDX LWC jest. So this is again a node module that we give you. So that node module, so if you type about this, right, so it'll give you a node module essentially. Yeah, so this node module, I did not click. Okay, so this node module has you know, has jest as the dependency. So jest is the, you know, is the framework that we use for testing our JavaScript. Now, note that jest is not specific to Salesforce. It is, you know, it is, you can use this to test anything, any JavaScript, essentially, including, you know, simple JavaScript files that you write. If you have TypeScript, you can use that. You can use it with Node React, Angular, Vue, everything. So Jest is like a generic framework. And what Salesforce has done is we have sort of customized it to our need. So we have created a lot of stubs for, stubs. So when I talk about stubs, stubs is like, sample mocks basically. So we have created a lot of stubs, to make your testing or writing Jest tests easier, right? So that's why we have this thing called SFDs, DX, LWCs, Jest, and this has dependencies on. So if you look at this project, if you look at the package.json, you will easily see that this has dependency on our LWC compiler, engine, right, and wire service, and also on the Jest. So as you can see, the current version has a dependency on 25.5.4 version of the Jest, while I think Jest is itself at 26.4. But that's what we do. We take the Jest framework and we have created our own sort of utilities and functions to help us, sort of write tests. So let's write tests for our one of the things that we have. Now, the tools that we need to write Jest testing is, again, the CLI. Everything is provided by the CLI. So the first thing we want to do is to actually create a scaffold, right? So again, if you want to incorporate Jest in your project, make sure you have package.json. Make sure you have SFDX, LWC Jest sort of identified, and also have some scripts like this that's going to make your life easier as we test along. So your project need not be, again, in the source format that I have here. It can be in any format, but make sure you have package.json, and then you have all these things, right? So now the next thing I want to show you is how to scaffold a test Jest test folder, right? So one thing you do is actually get the path of the file here. Okay, yeah, so let's get the path of the JS file. We need that for our command. So we have this command called SFDX force. I think it's called LWC, or I think it's called Lightning. And then it's called LWC, right? Now you can do always help on this commands and also autocomplete for Mac. But as you can see, there is a command called LWC test, right? So LWC test, and we are creating tests, so it'll be create. And then we need the file path, and that's why I copied the file path, right? So in this example, my file path is this, which is the preview component JS, right? So when I say this, notice what happens. So it scaffolds a test file for us in a folder called __tests __, and that gives a neat little file called the name of the JavaScript file .test.js, and pretty much give you a scaffold, and it has already given you a structure so that it becomes really, really easy for you to actually test this. Okay, so now let's say I want to test So how do we write tests, right? So one things with the Jest that you want to remember is, we have something called as describe. So describe is your test suite, right? So you have a bunch of tests that you write within it function, and describe is like a test suite which has all those functions, right? And then we have teardown. So this is called teardown, where we have after each, before each. So this is like we want to clear the DOM. We want to remove the component that we are adding, and we want to remove it, for the next test. So what this means is, so let's look at first one of the test cases, right? So when this test happens, what we do is, so what this is doing is it's creating the tree view component that we have, right? Append it to the DOM, right? And then I can do all my testing. And then when this execution is over, I'm saying now remove this or unload this component, so that it doesn't affect our next test. So that's called teardown in in Jest world or in any sort of framework. And it's very common to have functions like after each, before each. Think of it like at test setup, right? So if you've written Apex, right, you are familiar with this, something like this, right? At test setup, right? Where you write at test setup and then you set up your test data, right? So think of something similar to that, and this is more like that, although not exactly, right? Because this is like teardown. That is after the execution, you're cleaning up certain things. So let's test this, right? So testing is pretty simple. All you do is you say, so what I'm testing. So let's say renders tree view component, right? So it renders tree view component as my first test case. So what I'm doing, so I use create element. And where did I get the create element? From LWC. I got this from LWC module, right? So notice this. This is the beauty of it. Now you cannot use create element in your regular, if you try to import a create element here and sort of use this create element in your JavaScript class, right, which extends the tree class, you won't be able to use it because of the locker. We don't allow you to create these components dynamically yet. But the exception is made only for the jest test. So for the jest test, you can actually create an element. Okay, so it recognizes that it's a test file, right? And these files don't get saved on the org. It's all locally. So I create this, I append this, right? Now I want to test whether my DOM got rendered properly or not, right? So I can provide properties, like for example, have element, right? Now if you look at my file, I have label as roles, right? I have label as roles. So okay, let's actually make this. Okay, so initially the label is roles, right? So we don't have to actually provide anything. And we want to make sure that the element actually got rendered. That is when I query for this button, right? So not button. When I query for the lightning card and I view my title, it should be hello, right? So we are testing basically for the DOM. So let's see how to write that, right? So we can say lightning card, right? Card element. So let's say card element, right? And then say, we can say this, element dot, multiple ways to write this. One of the things we can do is element dot, can we do a shadow? Let's reference this syntax. I think it's called, so if we go to one of the, let's see, I think it's called shadow. Vary by the shadow or by, let's see. So it's called shadow root. Okay. So yeah, a little bit of syntax problem here and there, and that's why we have documentation. So element dot shadow root, right? Shadow root, and then you query. So you can query, we use query selectors, right? So now you're querying with the query selector, and in this case, right, my query selector is on lightning card, right? So I can query for my lightning card here. So let's query for the lightning card, and then also note that this requires keyword here, right? Now what you need to do is you need to verify that the card element dot, what do you have? Element dot title, right? So element dot title should be equal to hello, right? Yeah, so this is our first simple test case, right? So now a couple of things here, right? I want to mention, like how I was able to get lightning card and sort of see the title, etc. Like how do I know which elements sort of or which attributes are exposed for me, right? So if you go to the SFDX LWC jest, and if you go to the source file, and if you actually go to the stubs, you will see we have stubs for all the base components here. In fact, we have stubs for tree component as well, So if you look at the lightning card component, right? If you look at what stubs we have, and if you look at the JS file, you'll see I can view title, variant, and icon. So I am free to, like, these are exposed, in this SFDX LWC just as stubs, so that I can easily query with the, once I query the element, I can easily sort of get the attributes of it. Okay, so now let's run it. So how do we run it? So you can essentially run multiple ways. You can go to this, and it will start showing up here, and you can run like this, right? Also, just like how for Apex test there is a inline sort of a functionality to do that, right? Like running and debugging. Salesforce extension pack, it really adds this feature and makes it really easier, right? So let's run this test. Okay, now what happened? Okay, right? It has to be roles, but I said it is hello, right? So let's fix that and let's run that. Okay, as you can see, it renders the tree view component, right? So also one thing I kind of forgot here is a lot of times, the rendering or the eventing is asynchronous. Okay, so in that scenario, right, like we don't sort of just write things like this synchronously. We have to sort of write that promise and resolve it. That way, it becomes really you're sure that this thing, this whole thing renders, and after the render, you're doing your exception, expect use cases. Okay, so yeah, so the easiest way to fix this, and this becomes like really easy. You'll see your test cases like sort of failing when you have like, let's say you're clicking on an event and you are validating that the click event has happened and the DOM has re-rendered, right? So in that scenario, you have to make sure that you resolve the promise. Now it's pretty simple actually. We show you in the documentation actually how to sort of resolve the promises. So you basically do this. So I'll show you what we do here. So yeah, so you basically have to return and resolve the promise. So this is, again, promises are JavaScript way of doing async things. So you say you create a promise and then you resolve it, right? So it has two functions like resolve and catch. It has two functions, resolve and reject, right? So static. So this is called like static promise, where you have like promise dot resolve, right? You don't need a new promise. So in Jest, right, it mandates that you return a promise if you're sort of doing an asynchronous operation. So you basically return a promise, and then you say resolve, and then you have these two catch. You have catch and then, right? So inside the then, you want to see. So this is like the arrow notation, which basically means it's a function. It's an anonymous sort of function. In that, you do your expect. Okay. So yeah, so this is one simple like hello world example, essentially doing this, right? Now let's say I had, I don't have like roles here, okay, and sort of, yeah, so I don't have the roles here, right? So I want to validate that whatever I'm passing, right, is rendered. Okay, so we can easily modify this, say renders preview component with label let's say with label. Okay, so now what I can do is, before it sort of appends to the DOM, I can access this property, that is by saying dot label, and then say hello here. Okay, so then see what happens. If I run this, this will fail. Run this, this will fail. Why did it fail? Because it should be hello, but it's at row, right? I just pass hello here, and it should all pass. Okay, so that is how you write a simple thing, right? Now this is very simple. Now there are, okay, so now I want to get into things like mocking, right? So if you look at Lightning Web Components, a lot of times you have modules, right? Like for example, if you're doing a navigation, or let's say if you're basically have something like custom labels, right? So for all those modules, what you can do is just provides a function. We call it as mock function. So you say just dot. So you basically say just dot function, and then it'll give you a mock function. And with that mock function, what we can do is we can essentially mock it out, and then it has two different things. It has you can, so any mock function has two different things. One is the stub. That means what parameters are you passing, the results, right? So we can do all those things. And let me show you with an example, because with example it will be more clear than talking about these concepts. So let's do something really interesting in this component. Let's dispatch a custom event and see how we can write tests for that. Okay, so custom event. Yeah, so custom event, right? So how many of you know JavaScript custom events, right? So custom events allow you to like sort of dispatch data. So you can basically say the start dispatch event, right? So let's say I create a custom event called, let's say EVT equals new custom event, right? And the custom event can pass in the data as well. So let's say detail, right? And then it's fine. Where was I writing? Okay, so here detail, let's say this is where you pass the data. So I'm just passing something. It's fine. Okay, so I'm dispatching a custom event here, right? So so this is custom events in JavaScript. So one of the patterns that we have is whenever you want to pass data between, let's say, a parent and a child component, right? This is how you do. If they are within the same DOM tree, then you use custom events. So when you're bubbling up data from child to parent, you use these custom events. And this custom events is part of the API's spec. Essentially, it's part of the API spec. Now, one thing I forgot is the name of the event. So let's call it as name of the event as TreeClick. Okay. And then, yeah, and we don't even need this by, yeah. So it's standard JavaScript here. So yeah, so TreeClick, right? Detail, I just pass some data, and then I'm just passing the thing. Okay, detail is also a JavaScript object, so this has to be an object actually. So I'm gonna say okay, so basically let's just format using video formatter. Okay. Oh, did it pick the prettier formatter? It should have. Okay, there you go. All right, so now we have this tree, and then we have the detail, and we are passing this event, right? So now let's say I want to test this. I want to test that, my event was sort of dispatched successfully. My custom event was dispatched successfully with node as XYZ. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. We can easily do that by using, so let's write another it function for that. So we'll come here and we'll say it our dispatches event on click. Okay. So now, how do we sort of approach this, right? So what we need to do is we need to first make sure that we actually query for the button, right? And then dispatch the event, right? So let's query for that button. So we say const button element. So we say element dot. Now it has to be query selector. Right? So this has to be button element. So where is the button element? Okay, it's called lightning button. I have only one button, right? But usually, let's say if you have more than one button, you can use query selector all and sort of capture everything if you want. If you have like a class element to it, you can add a class element and pick only that specific class element. That works. So yeah, regular JavaScript query selector works. So we do this lightning button, right? And then now I don't want this card element because we are verifying something else here, right? So now button element dot, right? Now so here what happens is now I want to make sure and test for this event was dispatched, right? So by default, Jest doesn't know that there is an event that is sort of dispatching. So you have to indicate to the Jest that that specific event has happened, right? So now I want to go back to the documentation and show you that we do cover a lot of just test patterns, right? So one of the test patterns is for base components, for event handlers, right? We have a lot of things like that, right? So yeah, so this one falls under like the event handlers, or basically under the event thing, right? So you have to create a mock handler. So let's create a mock handler for even. I think we don't need a mock handler here. Yeah, okay. Let's see what happens actually. So yeah, so by default, it will not know that there is, an event like this, right? So you can attach a mock handler. That's always better. So you say mock handler, right? So we say mock handler, okay? And also, so this is a mock handler, right? So this is our mock handler, but then we also want to make sure that we attach it to the event. We attach it to the event so that the event actually catches up, right? So we go here and we say add the listener, right? So here this has to be the element. So element.add listener, right? So in this case, they were mocking up the show event, right? They were mocking up some kind of a show event here, right? But in our case, the event name is, what was the event name? Tree click. Let's just add that. Should add tree click, right? So now, okay, so now we need to verify it. And how do we verify this? So Jest, right, what it does is it allows you to give you, so it has this handler. So once you do the handler, right, the handler has specific properties. So for example, one of the properties that handler has is mock. So you can say mock and say calls, right? So it is a matrix basically that has all the the parameters that you have passed to it. Like for example, I can, let's see if this actually works. Let's just try to just see if this thing actually works. And then I forgot to talk about debug test. So you can actually basically put breakpoints and keep debugging, and you can also put breakpoints in your JavaScript file and debug it right from here using the debug test. That's so handy feature. Okay. So let's see if this thing actually works. Let's run test. Okay, so it actually failed. So it says what happened. So it says what happened here was, let's see what happened. So it dispatches the event on the button click, but the handler function, so which is our handler here? Okay, so this is our handler function, right? So we were expecting it to be called, right? But that function was not called. And one of the reasons could be we need to make sure that we move this so that the event listener is there. So let's see if this actually works. Fun with live coding. There you go. So it actually works, right? So because what I was doing was, I was not sort of putting my, sorry, what do we call it? So we were not sort of providing the event listeners, before we clicked the button. So we clicked the button and then we added the event listeners, and that's why it kind of sort of failed, right? So now it's actually passing. So let's see. Now we can do some more fun stuff with this, which is let's actually see what this handler has, right? So let's do our debugging here. By I can put my breakpoints and then I say debug, right? It will run. So I have, okay, so I need to make sure I switch to Node. Really not required. It automatically figures it out. But as you can see now, right, now I can do, debugging. I can basically step through the code. Where is, so we go to Node.js preview, and then, okay, so we can say just use the, we can just say current file, and that would let us sort of navigate through. So the debugger here has changed a bit. It has changed a bit since sometime it has changed here. You can add your own custom configurations if you want. Like you can attach a Node JS debugger as well. So it's up to you how you want to do. But let's do one of these. Let's just try with that new Node.js previewer. This is like even my first time playing with this Node preview one. Let's see. So let's go back here and stepping through. It's paused on the execution. Okay, so this is only has the Apex replay debugger. Okay, let's add one of those. So I'm just going to attach a Node.js thing here. Let's use Node.js preview one. Let's use this one. Let's use this one. Okay, let's give another shot with this Node debugger here. Okay, so this opens up its own thing. Okay, I see. So it started in its own tool. Let's see. There should be a way to sort of. Okay, so it has the configuration tag. Okay, yeah, I know one of my problems is this cam. Okay, yeah, so we have the, sorry, I was not able to see because of the camera being at the top. Okay, so yeah, okay, let me use the normal camera and fix this. Now, can you guys still see my screen?
We are able to see your screen.
Okay, sorry about this. Now I'm able to see this debugger thing. Okay, so basically you can select the Node.js preview one. It'll work. So you can advance. You can basically advance to it. You can resolve it. It all depends on what you want, right? So now, as you can see, I have the handler, and I can pretty much advance my handler and resolve my promise. Basically current. Okay, so let me close all the debugger. I think I have multiple debuggers sort of attached here. Okay, let's give one more try here with this. Yeah, debug LWC test. I think that should work. Let's go to the configuration file, and let's remove the. Okay, I think it's fine. Yeah, don't save this. Okay, yeah. So if you debug, right, it should pretty much be able to debug now with this. Okay, there you go. Yeah. So debugger works, right? So the thing is, as I said, handler has two things. So we can console.log two things here. One is handler dot mock, right? So mock has calls, right? So we can basically do this JSON.stringify. Sure. Okay, so let's see, let's run this, right? So this will show what calls has, right? So when I run this, so now you can see, right? So the calls has, it's a matrix, right? It's a 2x2 matrix of the things that we actually see. So in this case, we are not sending any data here. So mocks basically will give you two things. One, it will give you, as I said, like the parameters that you are passing, right? You can do that with results. And mocks will also give you, if you are passing some functions or, or if you are passing any parameters, it will give you. So if you go to the Jest documentation, right, and see what actually mocks give you, so you can go to the ES6 mocks class and see what they sort of give you about jest.mocks. So you can find functions like calls, right? So calls is always 2x2 matrix, and it will give you, the parameters that you are passing. Like if you pass file name, right? That's what it is. If you're passing an event. So when you are creating a function, like a mock function, like the one that we have created, this has, parameters and results. So that's what mocks will give. You can even debug. We can even debug this. Also gives you results. So let's see what happens. Yeah. So the in this case, it's just a return type because it's just an empty mock, right? It's an empty mock, so it's basically saying it has empty results. So yeah, so this is how you write jest test, right? Now, one of the other things that I want to show you, and that is where we have things in LWC, is like, for example, if you're writing for a wired function, right? What we do is, so if you look at here, so if you're writing for a wired function, we give you something called as register apex test wire adapter. So this adapter basically gives you a capability to mock the data. So if you have a wire adapter, that means you're calling an apex, or if you have an imperative apex, right, you're calling that apex class. So essentially what you can do is you can mock that whole thing, right? And the way you do that is by saying register apex test wire adapter, right? So you register it. So whatever the wire function that you have, you register it as an adapter, and then that gives you a method to say emit, and you can put your mock data in. Okay, so you can emit the response. So mock contact list here is a mock data. So if you look at this, they're actually using require and pulling this JSON from data. So this folder has a data folder here, and there they have kept the mock data that you receive from the server. So you basically keep the mock data, and then what you do is you just emit that data. So once you emit that data in the final, you can verify that the elements have rendered properly just by using the elements dot shadow DOM, right? Shadow root. And also, you can emit the error. So for the error response, you say emit the error. So essentially, you are creating a wire adapter, right? You are bootstrapping the actual method with a mock. So you basically say register, and it gives you an adapter. In the emit, you just emit the mock, and then from there, you just query for your DOM elements and look at it, right? So LWC recipes is a really good sample application to show you a lot of jest testing, actually. So in fact, we don't cover a lot of them in the docs, but we do cover in the LWC's recipes application. So for example, if you like event bubbling, right, the one that we were doing, right? So for this also we have examples of how we sort of do that, right? This one is more with Apex, I guess. That's why they're using the adapters. But Yeah, so you see they are dispatching in events. So you can basically dispatch a custom event, right? And then you can basically query back, or you can even add listeners and listen for it. So this is not the right example, but there are so many examples here that you can learn how to like write test cases for each of your use case. Now, if you want something more like complex, right, then you can look for um, easy spaces recipes, right? In easy spaces, we split the code into multiple packages, unlock packages, right? But the best part is like, it has more complex code, like it has Lightning message service, etc. And we show you how to write just testing for that. So you can go there and see how we write just test for that. Finally, I want to also cover one thing that I did not get time to cover is how to write sort of jest test for or how to create your own mock module, right? So you basically create a jest config file. In that config file, let's say I want to mock Lightning navigation service, right? And mock with my own jest mock. So I define a mapper here. I say Lightning/navigation, that's the name of the service. And then I say, I create my own like jest mock in the jest mocks folder. So you'll see that this also has a jest mocks folder. So if we look at this, right, and if we see, there will be a just mocks folder, this one, right? And this is where we can mock. So we just mock every every function that is there in the actual function. So we create a mock. So you can actually sort of define that in your jest config to say, whenever you have a flow, like for example, whenever you come across a navigation service, swap it with this module, which has the mock implementation. Okay. So that's how we generally map or mock everything. So not everything will be mocked by the LWC stubs. LWC stubs mocks all our base components, right? But if you want to create your own mock, you can definitely do that with Jest by just creating your own module or by just using jest.mock. So read about jest.mocks here, and that sort of covers a lot of techniques around how you can just sort of mock anything, like any ES6 function or ES6 variable or ES6 class or ES6 subclasses. So all of these can be mocked, and once you sort of mock with just mock function, right, then instead of real data, you have that mock data, and with that, or mock functions. So instead of invoking the real functions, you're actually calling those mock functions in. Okay. All right. So is there any questions there, Karan? And then we can basically run our activity for certificate.
I don't see any questions. Like guys, if you have any questions, like you can put it in the comment. I can make you as a presenter. So if you want to talk, yeah, you can ask your questions.
Definitely.
So if you guys don't have any questions, I think we can move on to the next part of our today's session. Okay, so I think I didn't see any questions or any hand raised for this event.
I see there is a comment from Andres. He says that the source is in web runtime. And just feel free to add more details around that. As far as I know, source is there, but it's like really minified, so it's hard for us to like sort of get into the JavaScript code. But feel free to share if you have more information on that.
Andrews, I made as a presenter. If you want to talk, yeah, you can unmute and then talk. Okay, I see there is a question.
Oh, so there is one question here. Is there a roadmap of just test coverage? Like, okay, so yeah, so let me show you. You guys can still see my screen, right? Can you see my screen?
Yes, Rohit. Sorry, it's
Yeah,
Mohit. Yeah.
so I forgot. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Actually, I completely forgot. So actually, what you can do is you can basically do a npm test unit coverage, and that will give you the coverage. So you can say npm run, and then say test unit coverage, and say enter, and this will give you the test coverage. So as you can see, I have currently. Do I have something failing? Okay, and there's one thing that is failing. I can look at it. Yeah, maybe I'm not getting expected results for one of things, but here it is. So it will give you what percentage of line. In this case, everything is covered. So I don't have to like sort of worry about it, and everything is like sort of covered. Also, one of the things we have is just toggle overlay, coverage overlay. So this is by Jest community. So they give you this extension. So so essentially, we need to have that just config dot file here. So once I have the just config dot file in my repo, that will start working. Let me see. Do we have some time here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So as I was saying, right, you can create a just.config file for doing some kind of more specific configurations here, right? So for example, let's see. So let's go back here and see if we have just.config.js. Let's go to just.config.js and create a simple config. Now, okay, so I'm gonna go here and set again. Note that the just.config has to be in your root file. That's very important. It has to be in your root file. So just config.js, right? Okay, let's copy this. So this is a simple configuration file. Again, not required generally, but if you are using the overlay, it generally sort of helps to have this. Okay, and then yeah. Okay, so now I have the just config file, right? So now I should have the SFTX. It's not under SFTX. Sorry, it's a just. So it's called just code overlay. Okay. It's actually okay. So there is an extension here called just code overlay. Let's see. Yeah, so this is the extension that I downloaded. And actually okay, so let me reload my project one sec. Window.reload. So now the overlay project should recognize that this is our Jest project. Okay. And okay, now it's running. As you can see, it's running now. So there it is. If you have a configuration, if you create a simple configuration file, it will run the test, right? And then I'll show you how we can overlay and So there is a failing test actually. There is a failing test that we need to fix. And that after we fix that, let's see which test is failing. Why is this failing? Oh, okay, because I modified the code. Okay, I modified the code. That makes a lot of sense. Just let's put this here. So now look this. So now it's I can just it automatically gives me whether things I've checked with the extension now is being activated, right? Now we can also sorry, just clicking here. So now I'll show you how you can overlay. It should overlay the things. Give me a sec here. It'll definitely overlay and show us the code coverage. Maybe I need to toggle that. Just toggle code overlay. Maybe the extension has some issues, I guess. Anyways, use this extension. This is really powerful because one of the things it shows is it actually tick marks it right away, right? And for coverage, yeah, for coverage, as I said, just run this npm run test coverage and it'll give you the coverage. Usually also is very good giving the lines. I think one of the things with this test class is like 100% lines are covered. That's why it is not like sort of giving us the thing, because it only shows the lines that are not covered, and else I want to just add something and see if it shows. See, there you go. That was the issue. So only shows the lines that are not covered. So use that extension, really powerful extension. As you can see, it showed me that these lines have not written the test code for. Okay, so I can go and let's say I code that specific line as well, right? And it will say, okay, that line is also like sort of covered. So yeah, I don't want to do it, but yeah, you can go and say, so it says this line is not covered, right? And now when you like sort of run the test coverage, it will also show that, those lines are not covered, right? So it shows there are line numbers, the line number 113 and 114 is not covered. And, these are the percentages of the lines that are sort of covered, I don't know how it calculates this one, but this clearly shows that these lines are not covered. Okay, so thanks for the reminder. It actually helped me to show you these capabilities as well. And again, the name of the extension here is go and search for Jest and use Facebook's Jest with Pleasure 4.0.alpha. So when I installed it was in alpha, right? But I think now it's out of alpha or probably not. But anyways, try this extension. Only thing you have to remember with this extension is actually use a jest.config file like this so that it recognizes that there is a Jest product in it, or sorry, the Jest tests in it, and just it's a Jest project. So it kind of gives you all those cool details. Okay. All right. Yeah. What to you?
Yeah, thanks, Mohith. This is really a wonderful session. I think this is the first time we had kind of a live coding session. I think we learned, attendees kind of learned more things about the Lightning Jest. I think it started from the base to the complete about the testing. So it was like really a wonderful session. Thanks, Mohith.
Yeah, thank you, and sorry for like the live thing,
No, it's really helps. We really had some kind of PPT. I think this more like for developers. I think this more gives an idea so how to write it. So this kind of stuff we have been. I think this really a wonderful session for us. Thanks for doing this live demo.
Awesome.
And for this, I think as we have to go for the next part of this session is our trivia. So let me share my screen. So okay, so let me know if you're able to see my screen. Okay, so